Hello, everyone. My name is Leon, and I just watched the RWBY Volume 9 Bonus Ending Animatic, an epilogue to Volume 9 that was supposed to be the original ending before it got cut. The general reception of this epilogue has been positive. A lot of people seem to be really liking it. Sure, they point out the occasional strange line and odd bit of continuity,
I think everyone lost something that day.
and that one big reveal in the middle was shocking for a lot of people, but everyone seems to be liking it. And I'm honestly glad that happened. I'm glad that a lot of other people found enjoyment in this epilogue. I'm happy that, for them, this epilogue has made them more excited for Volume 10. But what do I think of it? Well, there happens to be a single clip from one of my favorite games that perfectly encapsulates my reaction to this epilogue. Yeah, let's just say that this epilogue did a good job killing the honeymoon period where I was nostalgically reminiscing about RT. Call it a sober reminder of their writing quality. I do not like this epilogue for various reasons, most of which pertain to the writing and what this epilogue achieves in terms of its narrative. I would like to take the time to explain why this epilogue is so terrible, but rather than doing a rant, like I did with Volume 9, I'm going to take a much calmer approach. I'm going to list out all the issues I have with this epilogue without the harsh tone so that you can more easily understand why I feel the way I do about this epilogue. I do wish to preface this by reiterating that if you like this epilogue, I'm happy for you. I genuinely think that it's great that you are able to find enjoyment in it, even if I wasn't able to. But if you're going to tell me that this epilogue was well written, please take a seat and watch this video in full, because it isn't as well written as you think it is. But let's also bear in mind that, technically speaking, this epilogue isn't canon. According to the writers, the entirety of this epilogue is subject to change and alteration, meaning that any and all of the issues I have with this animatic might be non-existent when we actually see Volume 10. So take all my criticisms with a grain of salt. This video might be an irrelevant anecdote in a few years. And it goes without saying, but please watch the epilogue first, since that will make it easier to understand this video. I also want to say a brief word to whichever Rooster Teeth executive decided to keep this epilogue, as well as the rest of the new RWBY content, as a first exclusive before they changed their minds at the last second. F*** you for trying to extort the audience into wasting money on a company that's already dead. Like, I cannot believe that situation actually happened. Rooster Teeth somehow found a way to screw themselves into another controversy, even as their corpse is being lowered into the grave. Now, on to the meat of this video. We're going to go through the issues of this epilogue topic by topic in chronological order. We'll start with the world building, move on to the plot, check out the characters, then talk about theme. So, let's begin. The world building of this epilogue is riddled with many things that are confusing, as well as one revelation that, for me, destroyed my investment in Volume 10. I'll talk about that one last since it's so significant. So, here are my issues. The way that Nora and the writers describe this memorial makes it unclear if it's for all people who died during the evacuation, or if it's specifically for Team RWBY. If it's just for Ruby and Jean, then that raises the question on why so many people are here, and it further emphasizes how little the writers care about civilian casualties. You know, the thing they use to justify why we can't trust Ironwood. Placing the memorial near the gateside puts it in an incredibly dangerous location, since it's far outside the city and Grimm are liable to attack the emotionally distraught people coming to pay their respects. Vacuo, the desert kingdom, having its central piece of iconography be a pyramid, is so cliché that it's not even funny, and its placement in the center of a valley with no natural defenses other than the desert that the Grimm have easily overcome is rather silly. Winter's vortex and the efficiency in which it drove back the Grimm raises questions about why Penny was not able to create a vortex to protect her and Jean, especially since Freya created a vortex when she was at death's door. Reintroducing Coco Adele into RWBY by having her shred through the Grimm is a helpful reminder that Coco and her minigun can obliterate high-level Grimm like Deathstalkers and Nevermore in nanoseconds, meaning that the threat of the Grimm is mostly non-existent now that she's back. This giant Arrakis worm Grimm is so massive that I must question how Vacuo is able to exist when it seems like this Grimm could easily burrow under the city and create massive sinkholes to kill everyone. Also, talk about the least creative Grimm to have in a desert setting. Like, wow, sandworm. I've never seen that before. Neon saying that no one came to help Atlas when they called for help is stupid. They had only a day at most to come and save you before Atlas fell. During Oscar's narration, he explains that he tried to find out where Team RWBY might have gone during the fall, but Ozpin didn't have the answers and there are no books in Vacuo because of colonialism. First off, if the man who existed in Remnant for thousands of years doesn't know the information, then it's likely that there's no book on Remnant that could give you the answers. Second, assuming that there is knowledge in a book, it's probably not going to be in a history book. The establishment that Vacuo has a history of being colonized by other kingdoms, with Atlas being the primary offender according to external sources, makes the instances where Vacuans are cartoonishly evil towards the Atlesians very confusing and uncomfortable, much like it was confusing and uncomfortable to make the racial minorities fighting for their equality the villainous faction. Apparently Ozpin and Oscar are fighting the Soul Merger, which I didn't know was possible, and raises the question of why Oz never did this before with any of the other incarnations. The constant fear of Grim attacks makes no sense given the reintroduction of Team Coffee and the fact that Vacuo has several maidens to help deal with the problem. Unless you've read the 2 E.C. Meyer novels about Team Coffee, you will not know who these random people are, nor will you understand what the Crown is. We now have extra homework to understand Volume 10. Ren's evolved tranquility continues to be incredibly obnoxious, as the writers only use it to show the audience information that was blatantly obvious. People deciding to leave Vacuo now that it's incredibly crowded in favor of going anywhere else is fine, but having them walk instead of having them flown somewhere is stupid. Remember her message is beyond incredibly stupid. People would fear her and treat her as a monster in a blood-red cape who's basically the harbinger of the end times, not paint memorials of her that make her pose like she's the Jesus Christ of Remnant. Also, how many people actually believed her message when they first heard it? Like, think about it, a random girl that the vast majority of the population has never heard of before hacks into all communication devices and tells the world that every major conflict and threat Remnant has faced in the past year, from Roman, to the White Fang, to the hacked AK-200s, were all caused by a secret shadow cabal trying to destroy humanity, run by a person named Salem that also happens to control all the creatures of Grimm. That's like someone hacking into the presidential alert system and telling everyone that COVID, the Russian invasion, and the Queen's death were all caused by Bigfoot. How would you even begin to verify that information? The World of Remnant video on Vacuo tells us that Vacuo was drained of most of its resources after the Great War. As such, how in the world does Vacuo have the resources to maintain itself while experiencing the worst refugee crisis in Remnant history? Well, the answer is that they retcon this, because if everyone from Mantle, Atlas, and Vacuo starved to death, it would make Team RWBY look even worse. If the justification is that the maidens are using magic to create resources to feed and protect everyone, then that ruins Penny's death even more. If maidens can magically generate massive amounts of organic matter for food, why can't maidens magically regenerate the organic matter of their own bodies and effectively heal all wounds and injuries? Also, the fact that they're disregarding lore from the free, quick-to-watch World of Remnant content, but demanding we buy and read 2 long novels to understand what the Crown is insane to me. And now for the most important and significant development on the world stage, as well as my biggest issue with this epilogue. Vale. As we learned during Winter section, after Salem left Atlas, she went to Vale.
And now there's nothing left.
Linda Goodwitch is gone looking for help, Port and Oobleck led the evacuation efforts, and all the refugees came seeking shelter in Vacuo. The Kingdom of Vale, the opening setting for this entire series, has been destroyed. I have several problems with this. First, why in the world would you have the destruction of Vale be an event that happened off-screen? Second, this just further exacerbates the problems of Vacuo's refugee crisis. How, logistically, is Vacuo able to feed everyone when its population has grown to unsustainable levels? I do not believe that Atlas could survive its population suddenly tripling, much less the one nation that was established as having been depleted of most of its resources in the lore. Third, everyone has just forgotten about Mistral and Menagerie in this epilogue. Why wouldn't Vale try running to Mistral, which is much closer than Vacuo and isn't an immediate target for Salem, or Menagerie, which is not a target of Salem and is the furthest away from her? Fourth, the most logical conclusion for how Salem so quickly destroyed Vale is that she used the Staff of Creation to burn the city down, or maybe created a giant rock to crush everything, or a ton of water to drown everything. In other words, if she didn't have the staff, she wouldn't have been able to destroy Vale this quickly. I hope you're happy, Team RWBY. You saved the citizens of Mantle from getting nuked or eaten by Grimm. In exchange, thousands of people in Vale are now dead. Every single settlement on the continent of Sonus will have to be evacuated or suffer the same fate, and all the citizens and refugees in Vacuo will likely starve to death before Salem gets within eyesight of the city. Fifth, now that Salem's destroyed Vale, it's entirely possible that Salem has reawakened the Wyvern, meaning that she has access to a Grimm powerful enough to survive getting hit point blank by Silver Eyes, and has the unique ability of sweating Grimm pools that create even more Grimm. So, that's another reason why Team RWBY's plan sucks. Sixth, this is just conspiracy on my part, but considering that the Crown of Choice is still missing and will need to be gathered for the finale, and now that Salem has destroyed the kingdom where it would have been guarded in, there is a non-0% chance that Salem might start Volume 10 with the Crown. In other words, there's a chance, albeit a small one, that RWBY's plan failing just gave Salem 3 of the 4 keys necessary to start the apocalypse. Seventh, and most importantly, take all the information I just laid out, combine it together, and you quickly realize that Remnant is screwed. Vacuo is liable to starve to death before Salem gets anywhere near it, and even if it doesn't, the second she arrives, she can just use the staff or the wyvern to obliterate the kingdom and kill everyone. At that point, she just needs to wait a century, ask Jin where the Summer Maiden and the Crown are, then it's Armageddon. This right here is why the reveal that Vale was destroyed utterly destroyed my investment in Volume 10. This fight is so heavily skewed in Salem's favor that she cannot lose. There's no scenario in which her eventual defeat will make any level of sense. The amount of contrivance and contradictions it will take for Team RWBY to win against these basically impossible odds are going to tear the plot of Volume 10 to shreds. Speaking of the plot, let's talk about that now. The plot of this epilogue is mostly straightforward, mostly serving to quickly summarize what happened in Vacuo while Team RWBY were in the Ever After, as well as setting up some additional plot points for the plot of Volume 10, as though it didn't have enough loose threads to tie up. And even with this being a basic summary of events, they still found a way to create massive contrivances and contradictions. Let's explore those, shall we? This point is really a criticism of Volume 8, but I still feel it's worthwhile to point out, had Team RWBY specifically asked Ambrosius to create a portal that opened in front of Shade Academy, the entire drama of this sandstorm and the Grimm attacks would have been negated. Thanks to the sandstorm in Volume 8, it was heavily implied that the gate side was a long distance away from Vacuo, potentially several miles, while this epilogue shows us that they were 1 mile away at maximum. This isn't necessarily a contradiction, I just find it funny that these 2 chapters convey wildly different things, almost like the writers wanted to mitigate how bad this situation was. Either Winter used Maiden Magic to completely remove the sandstorm, or the sandstorm vanished on its own, meaning that if the evacuation was delayed by 10 minutes, then the refugees might not have dealt with the sandstorm at all. How did Team Coffee and Team Sun get here so fast? How do they know to be here? And how lucky is it that they got here before the Tremor Worm showed up? The conflict between the Vacuans and the Elysians present in Nora's section is either setting up future conflicts between these groups in Volume 10, or is completely dropped by the time we get to Crow's section. I mentioned this already, but it's hard to get invested in the stakes of any Grimm fight that happens here thanks to Coco and the Maidens. Additionally, the constant Grimm attacks mentioned in Oscar's section are either setting up future conflicts for Volume 10, or completely dropped by the time we get to Crow's section. Mercury and Tyrion breaking these 2 literally who's out of prison, as well as the reference to the Crown, is clearly setting up future conflicts between our heroes and these new villains. Not only are we adding to the cast blow by adding more characters at the 11th hour, nobody seems to be doing anything about the known Salem followers Tyrion and Mercury. Not only is it a world-building issue that all of the Vale refugees went to Vacuo instead of Mistral or Menagerie, but it's also incredibly contrived that all of the Vale characters happen to be in Vacuo in time for the series finale. The conflict between this poor person and Willow Schnee presented in Winter's section is either setting up future conflicts between these groups for Volume 10, or is completely dropped by the time we get to Crow's section. Crow's section of this epilogue has a strange tonal disconnect from the rest of the story that actually affects the previous plot points rather significantly. The tone for everyone else's section was far more sad and grim, haha. Meanwhile, Crow's section is far more upbeat and optimistic, and not just because of who shows up towards the end. The only way this tonal disconnect could have happened is that A, the writers forgot the established tone of the previous 80% of the episode, or B, we're supposed to assume that a significant amount of time passed between Winter's section and Crow's section, and that things have gotten better. The problem is that if we assume the latter is true, it effectively renders the Vacuans versus Adlesians conflict, the Poor versus the Schnees conflict, and the constant Grim attacks all wastes of time, as they all would have been resolved off-screen for this optimistic viewpoint to exist. That is the implication that is created by Crow being so optimistic. He is either ignoring the major conflicts to maintain his optimism, which is delusion, or the conflicts were resolved, making the previous setup of these conflicts a waste of time. So, which is it? Is Crow a massive idiot, or did you waste my freaking time? If we assume that enough time has passed that the only ongoing conflict that remains is the stuff with Mercury, Tyrion, and the Crown, how incredibly boring is it that the one and only ongoing conflict left is directly associated with Salem? Finally, let's talk about the final plot development for this epilogue. The epilogue ends with Raven Bronwyn opening a portal near Crow, and Team RWBY and Jean step through, reunited with everyone. I'm honestly surprised that I have not heard more people talking about how terrible this moment is, because, like the reveal that Vale is destroyed, this is a multi-layered issue that is so stupid it's almost fascinating. First, why bother having Team RWBY be escorted to Crow when they can just walk to him themselves? It's way more contrived to have someone hand-deliver them to him as opposed to them just finding their way to him of their own accord. The writers try to mitigate this by having Team RWBY arrive at the memorial, hence why someone would be at this spot, but that doesn't remove the contrivance, it just kicks the can down the road. Of all the places that Ren could have suggested the memorial be placed, he happened to pick the one place in the entire desert where Team RWBY would return once they were done with the Ever After. How incredibly lucky for everyone involved. Second, of all the people on the face of Remnant that could possibly be at the memorial site at this exact moment when Team RWBY returned to Remnant, it happened to be the only person on the planet who can open a portal directly to Crow. This is already massively contrived on its own, but it's even worse when you consider where we last saw Raven. Why is Raven in Vacuo in the first place? Why was she at the memorial? Was she there for the daughter she didn't care about? Or the half-sister she found annoying? Or the friends that she barely interacted with? When did she arrive in Vacuo? What happened between her and Ty during the interim between Volume 5 and now? Was it important, or was it a waste of time like the Volume 2 end credit scene? Third, the newly discovered significance of Raven Bronwyn to Summer Rose's story makes this even more contrived. As you may recall, one of the only bits of information in Volume 9 that could have any major impact on the rest of the plot was the discovery that Summer Rose lied about her last mission, and that Raven Bronwyn was the last person to see her. It's vital information that Volume 9 established as a hook to keep the audience invested in watching Volume 10, because that's how desperate RWBY is to get people to watch RWBY. Ruby Rose learned this information, and she would likely want to find Raven and get answers as to what happened. The big roadblock for RWBY is that Raven has a magical ability to disguise herself as a bird, has a strong investment in staying hidden to avoid Salem's detection and wrath, and really doesn't like anything to do with her old team or her family. So, the fact that Raven Bronwyn happens to be the first person that RWBY meets upon returning to Remnant, and they stumbled across her within 1 minute of being on Remnant, is astronomically contrived. RWBY just accidentally stumbled right into the one needle she needed to find in a warehouse full of hay. And that leads us to another issue. Fourth, why, when presented with the one woman in all of Remnant that has the answers RWBY is looking for, and knowing fully well that Raven has methods to run away, do we not see RWBY bombarding Raven with questions about what happened to Summer Rose? Did RWBY ask Raven and she answered the questions off-screen, thus necessitating a pointless flashback later on, showing us those answers when we could have gotten them here and now? Did RWBY ask Raven and she answered with this?
A good question. For another time.
Did RWBY even ask the question? Did the writers forget the only important plot-relevant information they created for Volume 9? Nah, it can't be the last one. The writers couldn't have forgotten something like that. Yeah, they totally forgot that Ruby would want to know what happened to her mother and thus would be berating Raven with questions about what happened. And I mean, if the writers don't care about remembering or showing something that is incredibly important to these characters, why should I care about it either? On the note of character, let's talk about some of them. First, we'll focus on the characters who are narrating the 5 major sections of this epilogue, then we'll touch on other characters we see in the epilogue, then talk about the characters that were forgotten about. First, Nora Valkyrie. Nora, and Ren to a lesser degree, feel immense emotional anguish over Jean's death, yet when it came to Pyrrha's death and all the subsequent references to her passing, these two don't really seem to care all that much. Just an interesting point. Nora mentioning how Grimm attacked the city for days is a key reason why sending the entire Elysian populace to Vacua was a bad idea. The only reason these two Vacuans refer to Elysians as orphans rather than refugees was to remind us that Nora is an orphan and to justify her stepping in. I cannot tell if Nora saying, "I promise to help Velvet," is genuine or if she's just using Velvet as a scapegoat to avoid being with Ren. And that's it. Nora doesn't really get much in this epilogue, she's just very sad right now. I understand why she's sad, but I'm just curious how quickly that sadness will disappear in Volume 10 now that Jean's back. Second, Oscar Pine. So Oscar saying he wished he had Ruby's certainty as opposed to her hope or her optimism is a bit strange. I also don't know how certain Ruby was of anything. When trying to figure out where Ruby went, Oscar specifically mentions Team Ruby and Jean, but not any of the civilians who fell in the central location. I guess we don't care about civilians unless we're trying to vilify someone. Mentioning that there are too many people and emotions and not enough time and how that's causing Grimm attacks is additional evidence that sending an entire kingdom's population to one location was a terrible idea. Like, seriously, why couldn't you send them to multiple locations? Also, Oscar, Ruby does not see people for who they really are. She vilified Ironwood the second he called her out for being a liar, and instantly forgave the woman who killed Penny the first time round. And that's it. Even when they give Oscar his own little section, he gets barely no character work that doesn't involve Ozpin. Third, Lai Ren. Ren begins his section by asking how Jean went from the boy at Beacon to the leader at Atlas. The answer is that he stole most of the screen time in order to get the most development. Also, all the stuff he lost between Beacon and Atlas was stuff you lost too. Pyrrha was your friend too, right? A lot of Ren's section has absolutely nothing to do with his own character. It's mostly spent propping up Jean, which is very strange. He also mentions that Jean held them together, when I'm pretty sure that was Ruby who held them together past Volume 3. Ren also has the absolute funniest line in the entire epilogue.
For a while, I've tried telling myself that even though we lost a lot in Atlas, Salem's forces were damaged too.
Any damage Salem suffered during the fall of Atlas is insignificant compared to what she gained. She got the staff, the lamp, and potentially the wyvern, and any Grimm she lost in Atlas are easy to restock. Losing Hazel, Emerald, and Neo will mean nothing since they were barely used in Atlas, and Arthur Watt's ability to hack anything is nothing compared to the power of creation. And that's it for Ren. The only purpose of Ren's section was to boast about how great Jean is, reintroduce some minor villains, and show that the world is currently miserable, as though we didn't know already. Fourth, Winter Schnee. I have no idea why Winter has to finally accept that Weiss is coming back, considering that there's no way for Weiss to come back from the dead. Also, just gonna say it, you could have used your glyphs or summons or maiden magic to save Weiss, but you didn't. Winter says that she should have died in place of Penny, and I wholeheartedly agree. I'd rather keep Penny because she's incredibly wholesome and doesn't deserve any of the suffering that the writers force upon her. But then we get something weird. Winter blames herself for Weiss's death by saying that she was by Ironwood's side for far too long, when it was Ruby and John's plan that created the scenario in the first place, and Winter was just too dumb to use her immense power to save Weiss. She also blames herself for the staff falling into Salem's hands, when that was once again Ruby and John's fault. If any member of Team RWBY had sent the staff through the portal, then Cinder wouldn't have gotten it. She also blames herself for Penny's death when she wasn't frickin' present for that, and it was clearly Jean's fault. The condemnation Winter gives herself throughout this section is strange, as is the pedestal she puts Weiss upon. Claiming that Weiss had faith that people could be good, saying that Weiss would know what to do when hope runs out, proclaiming that Weiss is the true heir to the Schnee name. I'm not even sure half of these statements apply to Weiss, and being the true heir to the Schnee name means nothing anymore. Now, for the big one, I'm calling bull that Team RWBY did everything they could to save the world, Winter. Not only for the fact that everyone is so miserable right now because of Team RWBY's failure of a plan, not only for the fact that there are numerous better options available, but also for their actions in Volume 8. While you and the Elysian military were out in the dirt fighting off the Grimm that were trying to invade Atlas, at Ironwood's command, may I add, Weiss and her friends were all busy drinking tea in the Schnee Manor, and before that they caused a global panic with Ruby's message. They doomed the world, they didn't save it. Last note, if Winter was the one who wrote "Don't Come Back" on the memorial, then not only does it not make sense considering she thinks Weiss is dead, but it additionally contradicts how Winter began this section by saying that she's accepted Weiss isn't coming back. And that's it for Winter. She spends most of her section berating herself for other people's mistakes and putting Weiss and her friends on a massive pedestal. Wonderful.
Maybe it's for the best that you didn't have to see this, Weiss.
Wholeheartedly agree, Winter. Maybe it's for the best that this wasn't included in Volume 9. Fifth and finally, Crow Bronwyn. Crow's generally optimistic attitude in his section is nonsensical. Not only for the fact that the past 12 minutes have been nothing but misery porn, and things have only gotten worse over time, but he should be absolutely broken by the fact that the last two members of his family who care about him are dead. The fact that he got over it off-screen makes it seem like he didn't really care that much. While I appreciate that Crow is pointing out the good people are doing in the small things, these are not enough to justify his optimism unless you assume, as I said previously, that most of the other conflicts introduced in the previous sections were resolved off-screen and a lot of time has passed, making the establishment of those conflicts meaningless. Crow saying that his biggest regret is that none of Team RWBY were here to see the good they started is, once again, ignoring the pain and suffering that has occurred since the fall of Atlas, which now includes the annihilation of Vale. Also, your biggest regret should be that their stupid plan killed them. And that's really it for Crow. He was insanely optimistic when it makes no sense for him to be this optimistic, unless we assume that all of the conflicts have been resolved and thus the establishment of those conflicts was a waste of time. So, that's it for the narrating characters. 2 of them didn't develop at all, 2 of them just got incredibly sad, and Crow became nonsensically optimistic despite all the problems going on. Given the source of Nora and Winter's sadness has returned from the grave, I doubt they'll be sad for long. Now let's take a brief look at all the other characters that were shown in the animatic. I am beyond amazed that Emerald Sustrai got absolutely nothing in this epilogue. Let her be the narrator instead of Ren, it would have been way more interesting. Neon Cat's inclusion feels so incredibly arbitrary, you could replace her with any other Elysian and it would make just as much sense. Also, she's an idiot. I can't wait for Mercury to die, because that's what always happens with male villains. He ain't getting redeemed no matter how hard you bait me with that look. Also, Tyrion's definitely gonna die. These 2 new characters are Jackson Gillian Asturias, previously the main antagonists of Before the Dawn novel. I cannot tell you how disinterested I am in having 2 new villains be introduced to Salem's forces when there's already so many plot threads and character journeys to take care of, especially since I know these 2 will likely get little screen time before they're defeated. Additionally, given what I've heard and read online, these 2 siding with Salem makes no sense. Jax was apparently lobotomized by Yatsuhashi's semblance, Gillian was starting to turn a new leaf, and I don't know how serving Salem will help either of them restore the Vacuo monarchy. Kinda crazy, they somehow contradicted these characters within 10 seconds. Peter Port and Bartholomew Oobleck are here too, I guess. report just exposits the fate of Vale, so you could have easily replaced him with anyone else. I appreciate the fact that Ooblik, who dedicated his career to studying tragedies like Mountain Glen in order to prevent them, has this look on his face knowing that his knowledge couldn't save Vale. But other than that, yeah. There's not much to say about Willow Schnee other than she's somehow living a better life as a refugee than she was in the Atlas aristocracy. She's also doing her best to help out in a bad situation, making her a categorically better person than all of Team RWBY. Whitley's also here, making some dumb commentary about how he won't hide that he's a Schnee. Raven Bronwyn doesn't do much in this epilogue, but it's crazy to think that absolutely no one cares that she's here given all the things she's done in the past. I guess we can chalk her up to being another female character that gets redeemed for her past mistakes. Remember, kids, you can always get away with murdering dozens if not hundreds of people, so long as you're a conventionally attractive girl. That's how the world works. And then there's Team Ruby and John. They're right there. They don't do anything, but they're there. Okay, let's quickly talk about the other teams of characters. I couldn't care less that Team Coffee and Sun are back. In fact, the inclusion of the minigun maniac just ruins the stakes, and every other character in these teams that we get to see exists solely for fan service. The Happy Huntresses still being around is purely for continuity. If they were cut, nobody would notice or care. The Aesops being listed as meh in this shot is the funniest joke in the entire epilogue, and just shows how mediocre they are. Finally, we need to talk about the characterization of the two civilian populations, being the Adlesians and the Vacuans. The writers trying to make us sympathize with the Adlesians is admirable given their current situation, but I also find it endlessly hilarious when compared to how literally all of RWBY previously treated the Adlesians. For most of the show, we are shown that Adlesians are prideful, smug, condescending, and morally abhorrent. And this is before we get to Atlas and are basically force-fed the plight of the Mantle citizens and Ironwood turns cartoonishly evil. But now we're doing a hard turn and we're supposed to feel sympathetic for them, and we aren't giving any sympathy to the Vacuans who are suffering on the same level as the Adlesians, if not more. It's just bizarre to me. The writing of the Vacuans is terrible for two reasons. First, as I said previously, it's strange that they made the victims of colonization the antagonist group, while the perpetrators of colonization are the sympathetic group. In context, I understand why Vacuans would want Adlesians and the problem they brought begone, but it still has some weird implications. But even putting that to one side, why are the Vacuans so cartoonishly evil? Like, it's not enough that the Vacuans are antagonistic towards the Adlesians. They have to throw rocks and cans at orphan refugee children who just lost their homes. And I don't know if this woman is Vacuan or Adlesian, but it's also so cartoonish that she decides to berate Willow Schnee while she's trying to feed orphan refugee children. It's just all so goofy. But now it's time to talk about the characters that were completely forgotten about in this epilogue. The Summer Maiden. Despite her immense importance in this story and how she's the last line of defense preventing Salem from getting the Sword of Destruction, she's never mentioned nor referenced. Either they're still figuring out who the Summer Maiden is, the Summer Maiden is missing and they have to find her, or they're preparing us for the shocking reveal that the Summer Maiden is a character from Before the Dawn. Either that or she's Summer Rose, because the writers have absolutely no creativity when it comes to naming the maidens. The characters of Vale. Given the fate of Vale, we can assume that any character from Vale that doesn't show up on screen in Volume 10 is dead. Menagerie and Mistral. Everyone in Menagerie and Mistral are just chilling right now, not caring that the world is ending, I guess. The Vital Festival participants. Despite being featured in Before the Dawn, teams Auburn, Indigo, and Bronze are mysteriously absent. We have also continued to forget about CL Soleil's existence yet again. Other E.C. Meyer characters. Despite there being 24 original characters in Before the Dawn, we only see 2 of them, raising the question of if/when the rest will show up. But the absence of these characters ultimately doesn't matter in comparison to the characters I saved for last. Where the f*** are Pietro and Maria? Oh, you have time to include the side characters that add nothing to the main story, but I guess the woman who taught Ruby about Silver Eyes and the man who helped Team Ruby throughout Volumes 7 and 8 don't matter? Why do you hate these two so much? Is it because acknowledging Pietro's existence would mean you have to finally face that stupid decision to kill Penny? And that's really it for the characters. We spent so much time prepping for Volume 10 and further ruining the world and plot that they didn't do much with these characters, outside of making Nora and Winter depressed and making Crow confusingly optimistic. So, let's talk about theme now. The major theme I heard online for this epilogue was a theme of grief. This epilogue is about the grief of losing Atlas, the grief of losing Team RWBY, and going through the stages of grief. Hence why there are 5 separate narrations, one narrator for each stage. This would be fine, however this theme falls flat on its face thanks to poor execution. First, the overemphasis on grieving over Team RWBY and John makes it seem like no one cares about the civilian casualties, which, the whole reason we're here is because we wanted to avoid civilian casualties. Kinda strange, it's almost like the writers don't actually care about civilians unless they want to vilify someone. Second, this epilogue does a poor job representing each stage of grief. Nora was in depression during her section, Oscar was bargaining in his section trying to find knowledge about where RWBY went, Ren's section was focused on everyone being depressed, Winter began her section by saying that she's accepted that Weiss is gone, then goes into bargaining by saying it should have been her instead of Weiss or Penny, then she sinks into depression later on. Then Crow is optimistic, which makes no sense in context, but I guess counts as acceptance. So that leaves us with 7 stages of grief. Depression, bargaining, depression, acceptance, bargaining, depression, acceptance. 2 of the stages of grief, denial and anger, are just missing. If grief was the theme, then it failed. If depression was the theme, then the optimistic turn at the end completely undercuts it. So, 4 for 4, it fails on all writing fronts. I guess I'll talk about the absurdity that this was planned to be part of Volume 9 as well. The idea that this was the original end of Volume 9 is absolutely insane to me because of how disconnected it is. The biggest disconnect is that of the world. Near enough the entirety of Volume 9 takes place within the Ever After, so throwing in one last chapter that focuses on Remnant feels incredibly jarring. Then you have the lack of a thematic connection, with Volume 9 having the theme of acceptance, while this epilogue fails at a theme of grief and/or depression. And then there's the disconnect that is Volume 9 focusing on a small cast of characters, while this epilogue is trying to catch us up on the entire planet. Ultimately, if it was included in Volume 9, it would have been incredibly jarring, and so making it the de facto beginning of Volume 10 is way better. But the biggest issue I have with this epilogue is how it feels like we're rushing past the consequences of the fall of Atlas. The food crisis that should have come with the refugees is non-existent, there's barely any reference to the arrival of new refugees from Vale, the major conflicts introduced are either completely forgotten about or resolved off-screen by the time we get to Crow, and Team RWBY luckily only returned after these things were resolved or forgotten about. The story of what happened to Remnant while Team RWBY were in the Ever After could have been the subject of an entire volume. It could have actually demonstrated how people responded to the fall, how they grieved, how they overcame their petty conflicts in favor of a greater good. It could have done so much great work had they let the writing breathe, but we truncated the whole thing into 15 minutes and then slapped it onto the end of Volume 9. And that's it. That's the epilogue. That's everything I have to say about it. The short version? Well, it's a terrible, rotting, blood-stained pile of shit when it comes to writing. The quickest and easiest way to fix this garbage is to scrap it entirely and start again. Sadly, I know that isn't going to happen because the writers have been ignoring any and all criticism for the past decade. They haven't listened to us yet, they're not going to start listening to us now. As such, I fully expect all of the garbage of the epilogue to be in Volume 10, and then some. And if I'm right, then prepare for Volume 10 to be an absolute dumpster fire of a finale. Assuming, of course, Volume 10 ever gets made. Well, I certainly didn't think they could have compacted that many issues into 15 minutes of footage, but at least I don't have to think about this garbage anymore. Those brain worms are now out of my noggin. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then feel free to like it, share it, and subscribe for future content. If you have any additional thoughts on the Volume 9 epilogue, feel free to leave a comment down below. As a small update for the channel, I finally decided to get a Twitter account. No, I'm not calling it X. Shut up. Feel free to follow me on Twitter to see me occasionally tweet about random stuff. mostly related to RWBY, but also stuff about movies, games, TV, and pop culture. As for the future of this channel, we apparently still have RWBY Beyond coming out, so I'll likely check that out and see what other nonsense comes out of the world of Remnant. RWBY Dust Queen is also releasing in the summer, and I'm very interested in that. I'm also interested in doing a review of RWBY Evermorrow and Fixing RWBY, though those will be further in the future. I also have plans to make 2 videos about Volume 9. The first will be an addendum to my conspiracy theory video, compiling more evidence that I've found supporting the idea that the Ever After was originally inspired by Neverland, not Wonderland. The second video is where I go into pedantic detail about the size of the Ever After. No spoilers on the actual size, but let's just say that Jean not finding an exit in over 20 years is down to poor time management more than anything else. Now, time to talk about that elephant in the room, the thing that I get asked about sometimes. Justice League X RWBY. When I made the community post about the time frame in which I was to complete those videos, I had not taken into account how busy my life was going to get. Between full-time work, online school, and an internship, I effectively work 60 hours a week, and essentially have 1 day off every week. Yeah, not great, but I've been managing it pretty well, and the hope is that the future degree and my experience at the internship will make my career much easier down the road. But the tragic reality is that it has taken a hit on my YouTube content. Between the start of this year and the announcements of RT's shutdown, I barely managed to edit together 15 minutes of footage for my first video on Justice League X RWBY. And with the announcement of RT's shutdown, a good portion of the script needed to be reworked. And while I am a practitioner of the long, as demonstrated in this video, there were a lot of sections of my original script that could be cut down. So, that's what I did. Since my video on the shutdown of Rooster Teeth, I've been reworking the script for Justice League X RWBY, and I've successfully cut down on the fluff and made the necessary changes to account for RT's closure. By the time this video goes up, I'll already be recording audio. But the sad reality is that I have no guarantees of when my Justice League X RWBY rant will be finished. Apologies for those who are waiting to see my reaction to those, you're gonna have to wait a little while longer. Believe me, no one is more frustrated by this than I am. But they will come out one day. So, until that happens, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.